revolution, and I think talking about ethics and open source is really important. With that said, I would like to thank first Bit Temple, Dennis, for hosting us. This is an awesome venue, and he's really cool as well. And I also wanted to thank Cambria for hosting this, and as well as our sponsor. But first, I wanted to invite Tra to talk about Cambria and what it is. They also won an award at Developers Week.
Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's our pleasure to be a partner program for Developer Week. I hope you're enjoying the conference. So Cambria was named after the Cambrian explosion. And our vision, actually our CTO and co-founder is sitting right here and he will be part of the panel. But the vision of the founding team was to create an explosion in intelligent robotics. So if you think about what we have in robots right now, it's mostly on the industrial stage. You see that penetrated in all sorts of industries, but not so much in the home, not so much in everyday use. And that's because the development in robotics is siloed, and people don't really share. And whenever you want to start a robotics project, you start from scratch. And that is a very inefficient way of pushing innovation in robotics. So Cambria was founded on the premises that you can share this information. You can start on somebody else's work, incentivizing people to collaborate and pushing for robotics that are affordable and could be adopted on a massive scale. So the platform has been launched as in a beta version since last year. And right now we're doing development mostly with research institutions, university, through our Global Innovation Fund. We connect the research with the corporation who understand the end use cases. They know the market, they know what they need to do in order to get mass adoptions. So that's one way of approaching innovation is from top down. And then another way of approaching innovation is developer community working on projects they are passionate about. There are a repository of code bases that you can start working on top, and then you're building up your team, and eventually you'll have a product that's available. And the protocol that we're setting is to reward people for their contributions, and if that contribution, that final product, is commercialized later, then the profit is shared to the contributors. That is our use case of blockchain technology. So if you're interested to learn more or join us, we are actually based out of Santa Clara, California. That's where our innovation fund is. We are hosting another event with the Silicon Valley Robotics called Women in Robotics. And where the innovation fund is, where you will see where we could do 3D printing, additive manufacturing. And if you wanted to get into robotics, just come there and we'll introduce you into the whole world of intelligent robotics. So this event wouldn't be possible without our sponsored. Another sponsor is TomoChain. And because they are not able to join us today, we would, if you could, we'd like to play you a little video of what TomoChain is in honor of their sponsorship.
What are the issues you think it is critical for the Ethereum network to solve? We think that while it's undoubtedly that Ethereum blockchain with its Ethereum virtual machine has pushed the adoption of blockchain technologies and decentralized applications to another level, there are still multiple issues of the Ethereum blockchain for dApps to have a mass adoption, including high transaction fee, slow confirmation, and network congestion. Remember that users would always choose to stay away from applications that require high fee with 1 minute of waiting for transaction confirmation. Do you remember the CryptoKitties game that takes up 20% transaction volume of Ethereum in only 2 smart contracts and makes the gas price increase from 25 to 40 GWEI to incentivize the miners? Causes the ETH price to decrease $100 from its recent peaks. TomoChain has been built as the most efficient blockchain infrastructure for leveraging the adoption of dApp. token issuance and integration. Specifically, TomoChain is efficient for both users, developers, and business makers. From a user experiences perspective, TomoChain offers near zero transaction fee. Transactions on TomoChain can be processed with gas price of 1 WEI or 10 to the negative 18 Tomo, which is very small compared to 25 GWEI in Ethereum. Users therefore mostly do not need to pay attention to the fee. Fast confirmation. Transactions on TomoChain can be confirmed almost instant instead of around 1 minute, as in Ethereum. TomoChain can be used for developing a payment system. This property is very important for dApps and for increasing blockchain's adoption. High transaction throughput. TomoChain can currently process up to 5,000 tops, and this number can be dramatically changed to 20,000 to 30,000 tops once sharding is enabled. TomoChain can open opportunities for any widely used dApp and can avoid network congestion problem in case of mass usage of dApp. Security enhancement. TomoChain is secured by our innovative technique, double validation and randomization. Thus, users' digital assets and dApps are always ensured safe. From a developer's perspective, TomoChain provides an EVM-compatible framework, which means every dApp running on Ethereum can be seamlessly ported onto TomoChain without significant effort. All dApp development tools for Ethereum, such as Remix, Truffle, or even advanced formal verification tools such as Mithril, are all available for developers. The difference is only some lines of configuration code. Quick dApps deployment can make developers' life much easier and reduce development and testing time significantly because all transactions can be confirmed almost instantly. Strong support from outstanding developers. TomoChain always has active developers who can quickly respond to all of your questions related to dApps development and deployment. From a business's perspective, TomoChain provides an ideal place where dApp business makers can do token issuance. All Ethereum-driven token standards, such as ERC20, are all compatible with TomoChain. Furthermore, TomoChain will standardize tokens for specific applications, such as decentralized data exchange tokens. Fundraising opportunities. TomoChain has very good relationship with well-known investors such as Hashed, Signum Capital, and Connect Capital. You'll have a big chance of being invested by these investors if fundraising on TomoChain. Time to market reduction. All development and testing activities for dApp on TomoChain can be quickly done by developers because of TomoChain's high performance. Thus, the time to market for your product can be significantly reduced. Strong support from community and good partnership. TomoChain has many good partners in different industries for building dApps on TomoChain, such as TE Food, which is the world's largest publicly accessible farm-to-table fresh food traceability solution. Trip Protocol, a blockchain network that enables travel service providers to connect directly with travelers in a new, decentralized marketplace that will drive down costs of both client acquisition and travel itself. Pharma Trust is a UK blockchain startup and global tracking system which provides security to the pharmaceutical companies, governments, regulators, and the public that counterfeit drugs do not enter the supply chain. Education partnership. TomoChain also has partnership in research and education with top well-known universities in Vietnam, such as Hanoi University of Science and Technology or University of Engineering and Technology. Built-in decentralized exchange, DEX, for raising liquidity solutions and dApp adoption, besides token issuance, TomoChain's decentralized exchange also provides a liquidity network where tokens can be quickly exchanged, thus provides options for any user to use any dApp.
So once again, we thank TomoChain for their support. Now I'm going to bring up Michelle. We'll begin our panels.
Yeah, so we're going to have a prize for the Cambria Nano Ledger soon. It will be announced after the second panel, after the open source one. Hi, Chelsea. There's food over there. So we're going to have a trivia on ethics. So I wanted to invite all the contestants up. This will be fun. So So we're going to talk about ethics. And before we do that, I wanted to introduce ourselves first. So my name is Michelle. I've done many things. So I'm an advisor at Cambria. Also founded Robotics for Good. I'm also a lawyer at PayPal and Cisco, eBay, Samsung, and Apple, and two other telecom companies. I started doing AI. I founded my own startup with algorithms in 2013 or so, and then also founded another blockchain company in 2015. And advised a number of companies, including FBRK, Cambria, and I think BToken. And I also do a lot of AI. So I'm involved. I go to Stanford and take a lot of AI classes. My startup had a lot of algorithms. I was a developer since I was college doing web. Used to work at Cisco and a database management company called Casal when I was in college. I work on the Loving AI project, so we're trying to make conscious robots, and also a digital AI called Robots Without Borders. The AI's name is Muna. She's supposed to, the goal is for her to really help educate, the 70% of people who cannot read. So that's my background, and I'm also certified. I got a certificate because you guys are so special in data science and ethics, and I'm just really excited about this trivia.
Hi, I'm Adryenn Ashley. I am a sex tech CEO. I built a naughty dating app for good girls to get women laid because 70% of women on the current dating apps have been unwillingly celibate for more than a year. So we use AI to help them determine who the right matches would be and then give them the safety and security that they need to say yes. My background, I've been in tech since I was 5, which is 45 years ago. I used to break into banks for a living. That was my absolute favorite job. I did penetration testing, and my bonus was based on how much I could steal, and it was always everything. So I have this whole philosophy about there's no such thing as privacy or security. So this is going to be fun.
So penetration testing and penetration testing?
Absolutely. Oh, well, I also in college was the research assistant for my sex ed teacher's new book. It was library research.
I'm Nadeem Mazen. My stuff is not at all that interesting. Yes. I have had I've had an interesting and varied background. I most recently was an elected official in Cambridge, the home of MIT and Harvard. We managed about $2 to $3 billion in public impact budgets and began flipping the council from corporatist Democrat to social justice Democrat. Before that, I was at MIT Media Lab and spun out a couple of businesses, including an additive manufacturing walk-in kind of clinic for community members on the border of the richest and the poorest part of Greater Boston. Now we're building a social network, decentralized social network where users own their own data, can monetize that data in direct transactions with other users, advertisers, developers, all kinds of folks who feel either shut out or under appreciated in today's social media landscape or actively suppressed. We hope that, we often say that Facebook could have been the pinnacle achievement of all time. 1.2 billion people on the same platform doing the same thing, and by a historical accident, that thing is scrolling through ads. And we want to create a real open-ended, user-centric opportunity for people to search the entire landscape of data and opportunity on their own terms.
Hey everyone, my name is X. Yes, just the letter X. 9 to 5, I work at Microsoft. I work with a portfolio of Fortune 500 companies and help them figure out how to use technologies like blockchain, artificial intelligence, and IoT to innovate competitively in the business space. In the startup world, I'm the CEO of Harvest, which is a blockchain platform that's aiming to bring transparency to the cannabis industry. So being able to know what you smoke chemically, where it came from, what's in it, as well as earn points for what you buy, not where you buy it at. My background, personally, I taught myself to code in high school because I had the ugliest MySpace page and I wanted it to be glittery and pretty. So I learned HTML, CSS, and then went on to be a web developer around the Bay Area, and spent several years in all of your favorite three-letter agencies programming. So your CIA, DIA, NSA. I built tons of applications for the military overseas, like the US and Japanese government, the Canadian government, a bunch of intel, like US Army, Marine Corps, everyone, right? So my background is highly technical from both a how can this technology be abused depending on what your values are, whether that's a military industrial complex, as well as how can this technology be used to drive social innovation and change and sort of fundamentally shift the balance of equality or equity in the world. So that's my background, and I'm very excited for this conversation today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we should clap for them, right? Okay, so the first part of the trivia is really introducing you to ethics. And ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, which means habit or custom. And, you know, ethics is something that we as a society define. It basically let us and help us distinguish what is right and what is wrong. So today we're going to talk about how does ethics apply in AI and blockchain. So I wanted to ask you, how are you using ethics or thinking about that? I mean, how are you using AI and blockchain in your technology right now? And how is that impacting and influencing, you know, humans or society in general?
So we are an AI-based dating app. It's exclusionary. Instead of swiping for 2 hours a day through thousands of people who either don't exist, deinstalled the app and never deleted their profile, or just generally make you feel horrible about yourself, our app uses digital ID, reputation staking to make sure you're a real human being and you're not married. And then the AI, it's 30% of the people who ask me out are married. It's just ridiculous. And only 10% of them even go, I'm ethically not monogamous. Ethically not monogamous. I'm like, I'm ethically monogamous, so we're not going to be a match. So we use the AI to go through your preferences. Part of that whole process is answering the question, what do you really want? I would say 90% of the people actually can't tell you yet. So we have to train them for them to train the AI. And then we use an exclusionary process to make sure that if you're somebody who only likes this, and this person will never do this, you will never meet.
Our lead programmers are MIT computer science artificial intelligence people, and they could probably speak better to the things we're doing in AI. For sure there's a ton that you can do when people start giving their data willingly and know where it's going and what it's going towards. And obviously they're then... You reward them for uploading their data. Well, exactly. If someone wants to upload their data and they know where it's going and then they understand what they're going to get back, then that's the kind of premise that we're trying to create. Sure. And in our case, from the blockchain perspective, there's just a lot of governance benefits to having people moderate and modulate the activity on the network rather than having a platform owner that has all kinds of perverse incentives controlling a centralized database of enormous amounts of data, which we've seen can be compromised, can be not compromised, but somehow subverted by foreign governments, all these other things. That would just not be the case if there was some kind of transparent understanding between the data structures and the community, as well as between the governance and the actual execution.
So Microsoft is just the smallest company ever, right? So it's like we have like half an AI project going on. No, I'm kidding. We actually are in every major government, every major industry vertical, and every major industry in the world. So there are literally hundreds of AI projects going on at any given time. I think some of the awesome use cases that we have is that we're really looking at AI not to replace human intelligence, but looking at how we can augment human intelligence and augment what we call human ingenuity. So our AI projects are where we take a very ethical stance, which I think will come up later around how we approach and decide whether or not AI is the right tool. But some cool use cases that we do have was like this company Bueller, which makes like most of the world's grain. We like augmented their actual manufacturing machines with a camera to do computer vision to be able to spot when there was bacteria on the grains. And then that data was shared to a blockchain network that was available to everyone who used those grains in the on the product. It's like as soon as they identified something was bad, like everyone in the supply chain knew. So the people who had processed it, the people whose chicken soup it ended up at the end, were aware that this was contaminated food. So there are lots of dope use cases, but that's like one of my favorite projects that we've worked on is making sure you guys don't get food poisoning when you buy bread from the store. Yes, it is. Bueller. No. Bueller's currently using that. We'll talk about scalability later, but yeah, Bueller's currently using that internally. And a lot of companies I know, not just Microsoft, like SAP has a solution as well that they do for sort of provenance tracking of food items that has a lot of applicability across industries, like the airline industries, as you can see with Southwest and all the stuff that's going on there.
So the next question is about informed consent. And so from the audience, how many of you guys read your consent agreements when you go to the doctor and, or the internet? Yeah. Raise your hand if you actually read consents. Wow. That's not a lot. So like when we go to the doctor, they give us consent. They always give it to you at the time of performance, so you really don't have time to read, or you just read after or so, right? I mean, you have to read before at the time, but you can't really like, oh, can I read it first and take it home before I actually consent? So that's like a problem, right? Because like a lot of times in privacy policies, if you don't agree, you can't use the site, but yet you visit the site, right? So. So when you give your consent, when you go to the doctor, sometimes, they ask you if they can repurpose that consent. And sometimes it's kind of good because you want medical researchers to be able to use that data, but sometimes they haven't thought about or foresee questions yet, right? So my question to you guys are, when you're thinking about consent, what kind of things do you think about, that is broad enough to cover unforeseen issues, but specific enough to really cover, some of the issues that are relevant to your company?
So we do smart contracts for consent because apparently yes and no are too ambiguous. We have this whole Me Too epidemic and nobody came up with a solution, so I came up with a solution. So it's actual consent, but it's a consent window so that anyone can revoke consent at any time, and then when you're done, you check out and you're rating your partner, but you're really rating the AI. How good was the AI at matching you to help it match you better next time? To continuously get women laid, because if you get an orgasm a day, we have world peace. So that's what I'm aiming for. But in terms of consent, there's a lot of other pieces, because people sign consent forms without reading them. I do it all the time. It's like, I'm either going to sign this, I don't get to edit it, I don't get to cross anything out and initial it. I'm either going to sign it, and whatever it is that they said, that's what the price of entry is for me to use this service. It just reminds me of this woman who went to a sperm bank and had a baby, and then ended up with a DNA matching 23andMe and reached out to the father. And then sperm bank revoked. She was going to have like 4 more kids. She had bought all of the test tubes, all the frozen sperm, and they took it back. So now she can't have a biologically matched child. So that's a ramification she wasn't thinking of for breaking the consent, because that's what was in the agreement. We don't know what we're agreeing to. We frequently don't have that conversation, especially in relationships. So that's what we're working on, is improving communication to get people to actually know what they're agreeing to.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. That informed consent implies contextual understanding. And so when your app says, do you give permission for Alexa to access your microphone, what they're not saying is, there's a bunch of stuff we're doing with this that even the experts who look at data privacy don't fully understand. There's a lot of opacity between all of these. Permissions aren't consent. There's all these permissions that we're giving as a matter of course in order to get some immediate benefit. And the way that the human reward circuit works and the way that the workaday life works, you are highly incented, maybe even compelled, maybe even habituated to clicking yes. But the ramifications of doing so are nefariously underreported by the people convincing you to say yes. And it's almost like a little devil's bargain or something, right? It's like the person who goes to the devil and says that, I'd give anything to spend one more day with my wife, and then he drops dead immediately, because the devil just tricked him into dying and going to the afterlife with his wife. You say yes thinking that you're getting one thing, but they have other plans, and those plans are rarely if we looked at them head on, you know, the test of cheating, would your spouse like to see you in that situation? Would Microsoft or Amazon or, would Google or Amazon like to see, would they like to see their data practices exposed to the world? What would happen? And when Facebooks were exposed to the world, what happened, right? So this is the litmus test for whether we're being ethical in our consent. Famously tanked at the box office, I believe.
The end was absolutely worth it. It's exactly that question.
I'll check it out.
So I'll speak for Microsoft and then myself. So from a Microsoft perspective, we're a service provider. So we provide infrastructure to big enterprise companies to build tools to run their businesses. And what we're struggling with as a company is figuring out where is the line between how we regulate how people use our platform and overstepping our customers' data privacy. So meaning like we have the tools technically for people to be able to build like surveillance, right? Like on our AI platforms where you could like build computer vision and look at like 1 million people's emotions at once on their faces with the camera big enough, right? But how do we stop somebody from just signing up from an Azure subscription and building something that's completely illegal if we don't, as a company, look at their code and look at what they're doing? But then if we did that, nobody would use our platform because we're looking at what you're doing, right? So there's this fine ethical balance of the way we build our actual tool sets that we release. So instead of looking at monitoring what people are doing on our platform, we build our platform so it can't be abused. So for example, that mass surveillance platform, or the emotion recognition or computer vision that allows you to understand what people are doing through a camera lens, there's a limit inside of it that you can only run so many calls every so often, and you can only view so many people and do data every so often, so that you literally on the platform cannot run a mass surveillance system. So there are implementations and controls that we're building in technologically to prevent these abuses, and we're not designing them in an echo chamber. There's an actual council that exists, an AI ethics council between Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Salesforce, every major cloud provider, where we're not me, but like the AI ethics lawyers at these places sit down and they come up with not backdoor agreements, but they come up with universal understanding of what can be allowed on the platforms that will not cause harm to humanity, that will prevent a singularity from happening, that will prevent a biased systems being released that result in denial of service or result in denial of access to whatever you're trying to actually get, or like systems that become institutionally biased, right? So that's the Microsoft answer, is that the cloud platform itself, there's a whole team. We have like inclusive design teams, AI ethics teams who monitor every product before we roll it out, especially if it's something that has the potential to be abused. On a personal level, I think that I don't go into a restaurant and just sit down and say, give me chicken. I look at the menu first. I don't know anyone else that does that, right? Like it's not a natural part of our process. And I think we've been trained with social media and with the ease of using these tools to just go in and order without reading the menu to make sure that every ingredient is something that we agree with. And I encourage everyone in the audience to take a moment and stop and think about the value of doing that when you're looking at consent agreements. There are websites out there where you can get sort of watered down versions of consent agreements so that you can see the bulk of what you're giving away. I also encourage everyone, yes, I work at Microsoft, but I have an iPhone, to look at your Siri settings. What is Siri doing? What are you giving her permission to do? Like, don't just hurry up and click through because you're trying to get to your iMessage app. Go in and look at the settings and look at what you're actually giving away and decide for yourself if those are platforms you want to interact with and how much data you want to give to them based on your personal values, because values are not universal, right?
Yep.
I talked about how shitty everything is, and I didn't talk about what we're doing about it. So on the Fabric system, one of the things that we're designing towards is where ads would normally be, you have to kind of go out of your way to deactivate PSAs. So from time to time, we'll say, you're still exposed, you're still making money by sending data out in this way, and these are the kind of flavors of the month of ways that data like yours are being used. And that's important for people. You know, of course, you don't have to see that type of PSA, but I think most people will want to see it on a weekly or monthly basis. I've seen certain apps do that now, and I think it's quite refreshing. The other thing is that we give developers and organizations a lot of input into all kinds of features. So it's not just layout or app integration or social apps, it's also what are your privacy settings. And so if you had an EFF kind of sanctioned setting set, you might want to go in your onboarding or go into your settings and just say, forget about what my settings are. If the EFF says it's good enough for me, then that's probably the most stringent setting set. And we think that a lot of developers will want to get involved not just in the social app side, but in the actual experiential and privacy side. Oh, EFF is Electronic Frontier Foundation, and it's like maybe ACLU for digital civil liberties.
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer. I draft a privacy policy for a number of companies and spend a lot of time on those to make sure that lay people could understand it. So I really do encourage you to read your user agreement, privacy policy, and consent. The next question or trivia is about data ownership and compensation. So a lot of companies like Yelp, Rotten Tomatoes, or TripAdvisor want you to contribute by having you give your opinion about a product or services. But the contributors are not compensated. And the data is owned by the company, right? So do you think that there is a societal consensus right now that we, as a society, should be paid for our content, ratings, opinions?
Yelp sucks. So I own Yelp-sucks.com because 10 years ago they deleted me along with another 1,000 people. They called us spammers. We weren't. We just happened to be tangential friends of someone who was gaming the system for SEO purposes, and I never, ever reviewed anyone that I didn't actually pay for their service. And they deleted about 80 of my reviews that I had spent time and energy on. That was my work product. And they just wiped them out. No backups, no warning, no nothing. So yes. I think we should be compensated. I think we should have the right to own our data, do with our data what we like. And yes, they could have had permission, but they should have just shut the darn thing off and said, here, go copy your stuff and put it elsewhere because we're not going to show it. The whole idea of compensation is interesting because it almost assumes that everyone's opinion is the same, is worth the same. And I don't think it is. I think influencers are influencers for a reason. But I also think that there's value in someone who is the exact archetype as you. Like, I will eat at a hole in the wall that's like got a busted front door, but it's like the best Chinese food you've ever had. You don't want to sit in there because there's like 2 little stools, but you want takeout. It's awesome. So I'm not necessarily have to be fancy. I just want the food to be good. So other archetype people would go in there and be like, it was gross. There was no place to sit. And they'd give it a 1 star because they don't understand the food. So being able to categorize people into their archetypes so that I can see reviews that are just specific to people who are like me and like what I like, I would find value in that. I would actually pay for that.
Famously, at the inception of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg thought you were an idiot for giving him your data. He probably still thinks you're an idiot for giving him your data, although I'm sure he has other concerns at the upper echelons of society than he did then. But I can't believe we have accepted this situation. This is like a situation of teachers or workers against management, and management has no leverage. And we're not doing anything because we're not doing anything. That's just the way it is. I think there's a little bit of inertia now where we are picking up and getting past the activation energy to move in the direction you're talking about, where we see value. On our system, folks can set their own prices for content creation or pay-per-click or subscription or other things that are over and above the basic transaction fees. They can set prices for their data, so the market will decide, and crawlers will engage or skip on data based on the reputation and the value of the person and based on the cost of that type of data. So we think that the right things will fall out of this. Yelp is notorious for acting kind of like a cartel or something, or like a protection racket, right? And so we should also be able to avoid things like that when there's more transparency on value and on blockchain-based recording of what's where.
Release the code on the filter so that these people advertise, this is their code, these people didn't, this is their code, and this is why these people have negative reviews and these people don't.
Right. So transparency is important in order to have any potential for an ethical outcome.
All right, so personal opinion. Social media are these apps and these web applications that farm content about you and then make money off of that remind me very much of sharecropping. So if you aren't familiar with the term it's like the 21st century digital version of sharecropping. So if you're not familiar with the term sharecropping, in the United States after Reconstruction, so after everyone was freed as a slave, there was a really shady business going on in the South where they would hire people who had just been freed as slaves, but they wouldn't pay them because they would say, well, you're living on my land, you're using my tools, you're farming on you don't have your own land to farm, you're using mine, so I'm going to charge you for it. So I don't have to technically pay you to do the work because I'm paying you in this tool that you're using to, take the cotton out of the ground, and I'm paying you in this shack that you get to live in. So on both ends, there was value exchange. These individuals who were freed did have the ability to go in and they had a place to live and they had a job every day. But they were ultimately feeding a much larger enterprise that made a lot more money, which is like a farm, right? Which made way more money than they were ever going to see. And I think that we've kind of fallen back as a society into that mentality where we are feeding these massive billion-dollar industries based on our personal information because we get some value out of it. I get to talk to my friends from the military who live on the other side of the world. I get to connect with people that I haven't seen in years. When I was in Afghanistan as a soldier, I got to FaceTime my 90-year-old grandmother who got to see me face to face and know that I was okay. There's value in these things. The question is the value ultimately worth it for what you're doing? And how can we as a society fundamentally shift this paradigm to where we are making other people rich off of our content and have no protections? So when you look at an app like Vine, Vine was made viral by all of the stars who spent all of their time every day generating content after content after content. And when the platform collapsed, they had no mechanism to do anything. Just like when those farms shut down, where do they go work? Right? So again, personal opinion, I think the way that data is going, it's very similar to a model of digital sharecropping, and we need to come together in a way to where we can push for a more balanced model of information sharing, whether that be through blockchain-based platforms where I can give consent to give my data away, or some other legal mechanism, because it's just horrible right now.
Yeah, so I personally love Vine. We actually have millions of impressions and views there, and our stories were actually featured with other brands like Michelle Obama and Vans and NASA, and it was really every single video that we made. And it was just super awesome, but when it was gone, it was gone. And so my fourth question to you is about metadata and data. I think every one of you guys own a phone. And the metadata on the phone include who's the caller, who are you calling, the date of the call, how long is the call, and those metadata have lower privacy expectation than the content itself. So my question is, should it be distinguished from the content? And what stories can you paint from the metadata?
I can make up all sorts of status it's like Mad Libs at this point. You give somebody enough data. There is a company right now that I work with. They have 360 million consumers, and they have 15,000 data points on each consumer. So if I say, I want every yoga mom who drives a Toyota Camry in blue and goes to Starbucks and gets a donut after yoga, I can probably come up with a subset of 5,000 people pretty easily and pretty highly targeted, right down to the nitty gritty of what do you eat, what do you like, what TV shows do you watch, really build an avatar of exactly my right person. It's scary, and at the same time, so I didn't tell you this before, but my ethical construct, I took an ethics class in college. They made me, I was like, what? 15, 20 different kinds of ethics. Did you know there's not just one kind of ethics? Everybody has their own different kind of ethics. So this is my flavor that I boiled down and distilled after a year in ethics class. I don't do anything that I would not be fine being plastered on the cover of the National Enquirer at the supermarket checkout line while I am in line with my mother and my kid. So that's how I live my life. I believe there's no such thing as privacy. So if I do anything, if I say anything, if I write anything and somebody plasters it somewhere, I'm like, yep, that sounds like I said that. Because it's going to happen. You have these people that gossip and do all this stuff. Anyway, metadata, back to metadata. There's a lot I can tell from just where you were, who you were talking to, and how long that conversation went, and then piece it with all of the other data that you don't know I already have about you. That's actually the key piece. is those little bits of fragments can be added to stuff we already know.
First of all, I think there was a question back here before, and I totally forgot to tell Michelle, so after this round, we should go to you or something. Second of all, remember that time where the U.S. government, sorry if this was you. Remember that time where the U.S. government worked with big telecoms like AT&T and Verizon to put packet sniffing and all kinds of illegal warrantless wiretapping at hub stations? Yeah, and then it was totally illegal and unconstitutional. Then Congress passed a law that absolved them retroactively of felony-level crimes. Yes, well, that happened, and is scary, and it's probably still happening as we go. So there's just a lot of access to our data that's very scary, and not necessarily, I think the drumbeat of trading freedom and liberty for security is beating pretty hard right now in the neoliberal and far-right extremist circles. It's not a far stretch from that unconstitutional premise that goes on today to say that metadata, that the farming of metadata is essentially the same practice, that you can triangulate people, that you can essentially invade people's privacy without a warrant, and that you can subvert major parts of the preeminent constitution in the history of the planet. So it's not just the U.S., but actually many world constitutions are modeled on ours, and if you can subvert ours so easily in a time of great information sharing, then I do wonder about the strength of America's values and America's commitment to those values going forward. So it's a very slippery slope, and I think it's very obvious to civil libertarians that metadata is just one of many flavors of unconstitutional government overreach. So we shouldn't do it.
Can you say those metadata examples again, and then I'll tell you what stories I can tell from them. It was like a phone call. It was like what time you called, how long you were on the phone for.
Yeah, so say Sunday, I am, I go to a Christian church. I call one of my friends and ask them if we can carpool to church. And the phone call takes about, say, 2 minutes. And I am Palo Alto, the church in Palo Alto, which I've been to. Yeah.
So metadata is terrifying because from that, the fact that you're going to a church, if you've given me your location data, I can know where you're going right after you make the phone call. I can know what time you made it, which means I now know what time of the day you like to talk on the phone. If I average that out over a month, I can see you're a type of person who likes to talk on the phone between 4 and 7 p.m. If I average that out over years or all of your phone call data, I can now exactly target you, which is one of Facebook's things that they do. They can tell when you break up, what do you do after you break up with someone? Because you change your relationship status, and then do you go start looking up your exes, right? Whose pages are you looking at? Exactly. And so these little tidbits of information metadata has always been used to paint whole pictures of people. The Taliban themselves say that they don't need an intelligence agency because they just go look at all the military's Facebook pages and go on the internet because all the data's already there. So I'll give you an example of metadata being used for good and it being used by a bad actor. So a bad actor would be Russia in LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, some military people would go on there and they would put where they were working and what projects they were working on. And they would also put maybe that they have a security clearance and what level their security clearance was, which makes sense because I'm trying to get a job and I want to use my clearance in there and I'm not going to, I need to advertise. People are searching for people with clearances. It makes sense. And what Russia was doing is they were farming all of this content where they were monitoring people's profiles. So if you maybe said that you worked at the NSA and you accidentally put the name of a project in there that you weren't supposed to be working on, now they know that you're the person working on that project that had that code name. And if you're maybe less disciplined about what you're putting on there, maybe you put what the project does. They don't have to go hack into the NSA. They just go look at your LinkedIn. And then they can collate that. Maybe, your commanding officer comes down and says, hey, take that off your LinkedIn. Well, now they notice that you took your clearance off of your LinkedIn, and now they're monitoring you. Why did you take your clearance down? Did you lose it? Are you working on something even more top secret now? There's tons of information that can be garnered from you by looking at the patterns of your behavior. An example of this being used for good are what you call social listening tools. Social listening tools are often used in disaster relief. And so for what they do is they scour like Twitter, right? So we don't use social listening tools to do like crazy spy stuff. We literally work with like Team Rubicon down in LA to like, we built a social listener for Twitter so that in the event of a natural disaster, we could identify from the metadata what items were needed where. So you tweeted, I need help, I'm stuck in my house, and your location is there. From that, if we can collate enough of that data, we can direct efforts at a more targeted level than we would have been able to by just going off of the high-level disaster response. So these tools in and of themselves, like metadata in and of itself, is not bad. It really depends on how we take that metadata and what we're using it for. So you can use it for positive things, or you can use it to sell people shit when they break up, sell people stuff when they break up with their girlfriends or boyfriends. Or
So that way they're sending me more chocolate. I don't need it anymore. I'm good. But
You know,
I did.
We have this national emergency craze right now. I mean, martial law and you know, war powers and all this stuff, they're real things. If we want to be doing that, there are provisions to begin essentially breaking our widely held values in order to be pragmatic. But my view is that we should not be doing such a thing unless we are announcing that we have met the threshold of this type of behavior, and it's been reviewed by, you know, a judge or an appellate court or a Supreme Court, and we're just not there, guys. We're in FISA courts in a back shady room where 99.9% of things get approved by judges who have really no idea why they would even reject anything, and we are way far into the rabbit hole of having social listeners that no one knows about, doing all kinds of unconstitutional stuff all over the place. So while this is a great example, even this would need to be deployed within a framework that we all agree on.
I got one. No, I like the open source thing. So I pitched this to Twitter, and they didn't do it. So if anybody has contacts at Twitter, tell them, revisit this, because it's a really good idea. So you know when we have these national disasters, or we had the shootings, or we had the car running over the protester and all of this, there is something to be said for the people who are nowhere near the situation, who are literally pontificating and taking up all of this thing, trying to find what actually happened. And I think that giving people boots on the ground, I was there, this is my live video. So I was a Bernie delegate in 2016, and I live streamed the stealing of the Democratic election in the state of Nevada when they literally stole it. And I live streamed it to 2 million people over 3 days, and then it went viral, and then every single news station cut my footage and said that we were violent and throwing chairs when that's not what happened. He lifted the chair, he put it down, he cried, this big old burly man cried. They took everything out of context and cut it. So using the metadata from Twitter, being able to say, okay, these were the videos that were live streamed from there in real time. I, as a consumer, want to watch what actually happened and make my own decision about what happened. I don't want somebody else's regurgitated version of what they say happened, because that's usually not true.
So I'm gonna ask the last question because we wanted to move on. And also, since this is a trivia, one of the contestants will win. And I'm gonna have you guys vote after this. So the last question will be on best practice in consumer right, because, you know, as a consumer, I think it's really important that, you know, we are protected. So, you know, the GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 has given us a right to be forgotten or to be deleted. So the question is, for you guys, when you're creating your company, or even before you start on your project, you know, what is your best practices? And this goes beyond compliance, because compliance is just really meeting the minimum, right? But I wanted to know, what do you think about, you know, when you're building your company, so that the developers and the people here, when they're starting their company, they could think about as well?
So the blockchain is an unfuckwithable record of what actually happened. Now, I, as a consumer, am able to go to you and say, you have to forget everything I ever did, but it's on the blockchain. It's impossible. So in order to comply, you're going to have to explain to them, this is an unfuckwithable record. Whatever you do, whatever you say, whatever you put on here will live forever in posterity, so choose wisely. And and contract with them and have that in your terms that that's what you're going to do. Because if they come back and they send you a little tiny little email, you have to forget me. You have to return it in a proper form, and if you don't do the right form, you owe them $20 million. That's ludicrous. That is going to starve innovation right there. So I say be super clear with your users at the outset what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and tell them they're opting out of GDPR because there's no go-backsies.
I disagree. I think it's a
I
good
disagree
thing.
as well.
I think the penalties should be high. I think every developer should think, just as every lawyer and every doctor does, if I do this one thing, which is borderline, I could go to jail. Jail time. Not just fines, jail time. Obviously, we would have a much healthier economy if there was jail time for white-collar crime across the board. For everyone. For everyone who's going to be a billionaire. In our case, we're avoiding this pitfall by giving the user complete control. We record immutably to the blockchain an address for different types of data, and we give the user control over whether the door to that data is open or shut. So we're not going to be storing 2.5 gigabyte videos on the blockchain. We're storing a pointer to those videos, and then we're saying, that pointer lands at a portal, and you, the user, control whether that portal's open or closed or open to some or what.
So you're not deleting, you're giving them control.
Giving them control. In a way that's hopefully compliant with current and future standards for and best practices around user privacy and user control. So we don't disagree. I'm just saying the penalties for not complying should be high, and that as onerous as it is, we should get used to understanding the law and the ethical boundaries within our field. Because there's a lot of go fast break things, and that's great for UI UX. It's not as good for someone's medical records or dating history.
I would like a grand jury to determine whether it was nefarious or stupid.
X.
So at our company, we have a framework that we've rolled out over the last 2 years that was developed internally across multiple departments. It's called our Ethical AI Framework. I don't have it memorized, but there are a couple of I think it's like 6 principles. And in them, one of them is like, does this AI actually do what it's supposed to? Like, is this AI actually accomplishing the task that it should? The next thing is this AI reliable and scalable? Meaning, we trained it on one data set, but does it apply when we add more data into that data set from a more diverse group of people? And then we're working on establishing numerical standards of fairness. And I don't mean fairness in a sense of like, is this good or not? I mean, literally, if we're training a data set to do something against a diverse group of people, have we literally included enough of those people, numerically speaking, for this data set to be valid across that group of people? You guys might have seen a lot of issues in the news about how facial recognition software struggles to recognize different races because it's not trained properly on a large enough variation of people. And so one of the things that we're doing, we don't train stuff on like facial recognition like that, but like, and we're coming up with a standard between our legal department and our engineering teams of like numerically, what is the baseline for anything that we release to be trained on so that it's accessible enough to where it won't inherently exclude people, right? And one of the projects that we actually reversed course on because it didn't work was an AI in hospitals that would determine whether or not a person came in with breathing issues needed to be admitted for pneumonia. The problem was this AI, every time somebody with asthma came in, it was saying, no, they're not at risk, like 100% of the time, which makes no sense. Like if someone with asthma comes in as having breathing issues, then they need to be admitted for pneumonia. But what the AI could not pick up or be trained on is that people with asthma are just generally more self-aware of their breathing, so they go to hospitals earlier in the process. So they're a little bit less symptomatic when they go to the hospital, but they're still not at less risk. So in that project, we completely decommissioned it and said, if we roll something like this out, it will be harmful because the AI cannot support this decision-making process. And we do that with customers all the time.
So there's a ethics, in Robotics for Good and in Facebook, there's actually an ethics documentation that you can find. And if you're building products and with blockchain and AI, you can go there and really look at all the points that I just spoke about, and it will be more comprehensive. I just want to thank you, everyone. And before they go, just wanted to, whoever is going to win, just really by sound. So let's see. Adryenn? All right, Nadeem, with fabric. And then X and Microsoft. All right, we have a winner here, and it's X. No, Charles is going to give you a prize. While X is getting her prize, I wanted to introduce you to Gideon, who is the moderator for the next panel. And we're going to talk about open source.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gideon, and I'll be moderating the panel for open source, blockchain, and AI. Awesome, yeah. And so for the past 3 years, I've been into blockchain, and I think it's very, very interesting because I believe in decentralization. And I think that might save us from AI when that happens. And I'm very excited to have this group of experts here today. And I think we should all give them a round of applause. So for this panel, we will have a discussion, and then we'll also talk with the audience. So if you have some questions, just get them ready. We'll ask you as we have the panel, so that it's going to be more interactive. I would like you to start, introduce yourself, talk about what you do, and how you're involved with blockchain and AI.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jared. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Cambria. So thank you all for coming to this event. We are very passionate about, originally we started a robotics company called OmniLabs. And from that, we're super passionate about getting open source into fields that are just beyond software only. So we're interested in how do you make hardware more collaborative, more innovative? How do you move faster? Because ultimately, we believe the world needs to solve problems that it faces at a faster rate. And a lot of those are physical problems, things in the real world. So we use blockchain as a way to attribute work and to sort of form a pool of tech, a collective pool of tech that can protect itself, and there's safety in numbers in that, as opposed to all these separate little open source projects that have no way to protect or defend themselves. That's our main interest and our passion.
This is Steve, CEO and co-founder of Throughput Network. What we are doing is building a decentralized communication network. In the previous session, people, the panelists were talking about the privacy, right? Data privacy. And the Throughput Network actually provides security and privacy for communication. As we know, Facebook and WhatsApp, WeChat especially, all those kind of messenger apps monitor user activities. I mean, they can see your content, your message, and your phone calls. And but our platform, the decentralized network, can enable any application has 100% security and end-to-end encryption, and can truly protect users' privacy. And my personal experience, my background is in the communication industry. It's almost 23 years, and I was the first employee of WebEx, the web conference. That's back to 23 years ago. And later, I started a video conference company. And 2010, the company was sold to Huawei. WebEx was sold to Cisco, and my own company was sold to Huawei. And 2012, I started another communication company. We have some mobile communication apps like VPN, Messenger, VoIP, OTT, combined with about 60 million users. And the company went IPO in China about 3 years ago. So the Throughput Network is my first company, and actually what we are doing, is disrupt my previous applications. Those are all centralized applications, and Throughput Network is decentralized.
Hi, folks. My name is Tony, and I'm the co-founder and CTO of BToken. So you guys probably have heard of us, maybe. We're originally known as the Airbnb on the blockchain. We've since kind of transitioned a bit to be more of a enterprise travel, I guess, still on the blockchain, I suppose. So what does that mean? Well, how many people here use Airbnb? What? How many people here have ever been to an Airbnb where they didn't have toilet paper? Oh, there's more than one person, I suppose. I was just in Prague for Eat Denver, didn't have toilet paper there. Had to go run out and get toilet paper. So we asked ourselves, you know what if we can make that experience more consistent? What if we can make that experience better? And what if we can make that experience more business friendly? And so that's when we recently transitioned a couple months ago to being basically enterprise travel on the blockchain stuff. Before that, I guess to answer your question, how do I, how am I related to this machine learning space? Before that, I was an engineer at Uber, working on their basically fraud team. So built a lot of machine learning models, machine learning features to basically detect when someone would commit fraud on Uber. Before that, I worked at an ad tech company, basically building models for serving ads. Yep, that's
Hi, Ron. I'm Jinjing. I am a software engineer from Google, and I'm also one of the founders of the ABC blockchain community. So ABC blockchain community is a technical community that provides a place for the blockchain enthusiasts to learn, apply, and explore the blockchain technology. As a person with technical background, I really saw this huge potential in the blockchain technology. But to be honest with you, I still see it at its infancy stage. I mean, the infrastructure is so not mature, and there's just not so few talents really in this space. So we really want to have this technical community where a lot of engineers can come together and practice code and propose new solutions, and collaboratively they can bring up the next generation of the blockchain technology and really support the real world use cases.
Awesome, awesome. So my next question actually goes straight to you, Jinjing, because you were talking about the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And from what we know, last year was not very good for the crypto blockchain space, and that can be attributed to the fact that there were no real projects, no real users. And the question here is, what should we be building right now? Is it infrastructure projects, just like Ethereum and the rest of them? Or should we be focused on dApps that people could use every day to increase the users of blockchain or the mass adoption?
I think that's an excellent question. I think we need both because obviously we need the infrastructure to support whatever dApps you want to build on top. You can have you can have a great idea for dApps that will just be so perfect and everyone should use it, but under the hood, the blockchain just wouldn't support the transactions, and the transaction fees skyrocket high, and your dApp's not going anywhere. But at the same time, I do think we should kind of shift a little more focus onto really being able to build usable dApps, find a dApp that has the real product market fit and that really needs the blockchain use case, and build tools to enable the developers to build the dApps much more easier. So I think we need both, kind of. And I can see there's some people who are more skilled in building the infrastructure, and I think they should continue doing what they are doing, whereas I also see there's people who have pretty good product thinking and then can more focus on the product side.
So I may be a little biased, but I'd say that more focused on the DApp side would bring wider adoption quicker. So today, I'm not sure how many people here know what MetaMask is? Right? How many people like MetaMask? What? Just one person out there. So for folks at home, one person out of the entire audience raised their hand. Well, I kind of like MetaMask. It's not intuitive, right? The way you interact with the blockchain isn't a way where someone who isn't familiar with the space yet, even our engineers have issues interacting with MetaMask, right? It's not intuitive. It's not easy. And the UI and UX component is a very important component that needs to be addressed first. And I think that once that happens, everything else would kind of fall into place, just in my opinion. Like more people you have using DApps, the more people will be on the blockchain, right? So that's just my perspective.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Go ahead, yeah, to Steve. I have an extra question for you too, Steve. Now, if we look at the fact that we have like so many infrastructure projects, the last time I looked at GitHub, we kind of found that there are over 6,500 blockchain projects, open source, on GitHub. And most of them actually use different languages and different consensus models. So the question is, if we're really going to have mass adoption, we should kind of have either a way of providing real cross-chain transactions or cross-chain technology for everyone to operate together. Or do you think that's the way to move on? Or is it going to be like a scenario where only one company wins, if it's Ethereum or EOS or any other company, becomes the main blockchain for everyone to be riding on? Or should all these 6,500 different projects move together and have a consensus, a solution on how they can build tools for blockchain?
Very good question, but it's a two different question. I have some thoughts about that. First of all, regarding the DApp, I would say we have to remove the D from the DApp. You know what? The true decentralized app is very limited. How many decentralized apps you can think about? Very, very few. That's DApp is not what the people need. Yeah, what the people need is can leverage the benefit of blockchain, means trust. Yeah, and you can still be a centralized app again, but you can tokenize that, or you can be a hybrid app. Some of them is centralized, and some of it is not centralized. When we are talking about a DApp, it usually means a smart contract. Smart contract is very, very dumb, stupid. You cannot build an amazing app, a massive adopted app based on this stupid layer. You see, that's a problem. So people, limit the mind into a small box. We need to think out of the box. What is an app can be built on top of blockchain? Yeah, BitTorrent is a decentralized app, right? And it's not a blockchain app. And of course, there is no large-scale apps on blockchain. But I would say, we need to rethink of what is the app on blockchain and think out of the box. For example, we are building a decentralized VPN. Yeah, and because we already have about 80 million users, we will move the user base to the blockchain. And that's a true 100% decentralized on blockchain. And when we release that, you will see that is one of the largest massive adoption of application, but it's very, very few. And I saw a lot of user scenarios we can build, but not 100% decentralized. So that's my conclusion. We should remove the D from the DApp. And regarding your second question about there are so many blockchain projects. One of the reasons is the open source. People can copy from A and to B, right, to C, and you can get millions of blockchain projects. You see, that's the evil side of the open source. And blockchain is supposed to be open. Nobody should file patent, and so everybody can copy that, right? But there is a good reason for that. You know what? The problem is, every blockchain platform, even in the future, it will have very limited capacity. Okay, let's say, you got 100,000 TPS. That's very, very high, right? Today, most like 1,000 TPS. EOS is 3,000. Ethereum, of course, is very low. So even, say, let's say Tomo chain, even like a top network, we can support 100,000 TPS. But it's still 100,000. Comparing to a centralized system like Facebook, it's still very, very limited. So what is the solution? The solution is you copy, let's say, EOS 1, EOS 2 to EOS 10. Each one can support 100,000 TPS. So let's say, when we launch the mainnet, top network, in the future, maybe somebody say, oh, I build a top network 2, top network 3, combined, that's 1 million TPS. If there is a massive application, they do need a 10 top network to support the larger user base. That's my thought.
So I guess for me, actually, the biggest thing is that although the crash is hurtful for many projects, many people, actually, I think the space needs less volatility. I think when things are very volatile, people are reluctant to adopt technologies because, so for example, case in point for Cambria, we work with a lot of universities. We're trying to get their tech out into the real world, open source, all this stuff. It's hard to get them. You have to do a lot of work to get them to talk about, to have the conversation about tokens and all this kind of stuff. It's challenging. And when things are like up and down like this all the time, that's all people pay attention to. All the air is sucked out of the room. People are just talking about price all day. That's it, right? So I think, ironically, a slower period, a period of slower growth and more gradual growth will actually be conducive to better apps being built. People focusing on real text, real cases where they have to work hard to sort of earn the funding, right? Rather than just falling in their lap. I think that's actually a really important thing for the period as a whole. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have to remove the D from the D app, right? Yeah, okay, we'll remove the D. No more D, just the app. Thank you. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, so thanks for bringing it up. I think for us, the interesting thing is, so I'd like to think of all the data on blockchain as almost, these days it's almost very segregated, right? So as soon as you go off-chain to anything else, a centralized system, you don't have the trust over the veracity of that data. So it's very hard, unless you do the sign proofs and sign trees and off-chain stuff, you have to like vet that data, once it went off-chain, is still consistent with whatever representations you have on-chain. So I think there are still some challenges in there. I think the community is working on that as a whole, but under the unified framework of these off-chain approaches or side chains and things like that. So I think that's kind of similar to what you're saying, but I think that's how they roll it in rather than saying, just goes to some off database and then you only do the swap on-chain. So that, anyway, I don't know if that helps, but that's how I, yeah. And I think philosophically, I think similarly, a lot of the systems built to be effective today, the web has spoiled everyone. Everything is fast. Everything is instant. So, anything that takes more than like 3 seconds, you're like, oh, reload the page, something went wrong. So you really have to leverage some hybrid models today. So I think everyone in this space is exploring those kind of approaches, I think, yeah. So.
Okay, so is anyone here working with any project that's open sourced right now? Open source?
Not yet, but I have had a huge lesson about open source.
So would you want to go open source?
Okay, let me go first. Okay. Back to 7 years ago, we built the first, the world's first end-to-end encryption messenger, but the name is Cover.me, and that's back to 7 years ago. There was no Signal, no Telegram at that time, and my app was very popular. We quickly get about 1 million users in, I think, in less than 6 months. Yeah, and however, we quickly found an issue. Our users, customer, they really have concerns about the app. So they keep saying that as a question: is the app really secure? How can you prove that? So for a secure messenger, but you actually cannot answer the question because you can claim you are using, say, 250 bits encryption. You are using double encryption, all those kind of things. But the question is, are you really using them? Right? Yeah. So whatever you say, people still have concern. Yeah. And 1 year later, the Telegram guys, those guys are very smart, and they make the decision. They open source the backend, the algorithm of the Telegram stuff. Then Telegram got very popular. Now they have about several hundred million users, right? And we, the Cover.me app, still only 5 million users. It's a high-end, it's a closed system, it's not free, and the Telegram was open source. Now they are closed again, but it was open at that time, and then now they have several hundred million users. So that's the power of open source. So as soon as you open the code, people get have trust to your system, and the blockchain is all about the trust. So for a blockchain project, you have to be open source. For a security product, you have to be open source. For us, Top Network, because we are still in very early stage, so we are not in open source yet. But right before we launch the mainnet, we will be open source. Yeah.
To answer your question, for B-Token, our protocols are open source. Most of them. There's some stuff that we're still developing. We're going to release soon. Our front end of our website is open source. Our back end isn't open source yet, but we have plans to open source it soon. Was that? There were like 1 or 2 people. Well, outside of our team, that is.
I speak from my experience from working with Google. I mean, Google has a lot. Google is sponsoring a lot of big open source projects. In fact, your favorite Chrome browser is based on the open source Chromium project. And I think open source not only do you enable people to see through your code and get a little trust, like they understand that you're secure, you're doing the right thing, but also it really also invites people to contribute back, because I think like Google decided to open source the Chromium project, and then a lot of people actually helped improve the JavaScript V8 engine, and that really makes like noding a website like much faster than before. That kind of really shapes how our like internet application is nowadays. So I think it really has like a lot of benefits. Yeah.
It's great. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, actually, Cambria, we do a lot of work with talking to different corporations and universities trying to do open source projects, because actually that's the fundamental thing we want to get in there. We want to get open source projects all on Cambria and funded through contributors and everything like that. The thing we found is actually, so really interesting about open source is it really much depends on what you're trying to do with open source. That you can do the model where you want to prove something, you want to prove that it's actually doing encryption, you want to prove X, Y, Z. You can also do the model where you're just so passionate about working on something that that's how you put it up. You want to share it with the world, or you want to use it yourself. And I think if you look at the birth of things like Linux, a lot of that stuff that happened is because it's really just people working for passion, not for money or anything else. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of those people tend to be like 10 to 50 times more impactful than someone paid to do that work. So these people will like live and breathe and eat that problem, like whether it's like, device driver for something, they'll just do only that. And I think the interesting thing about discovering these networks is you basically discover the most impactful people in that space. And so that's why we are trying to really tap into that as much as we can and get those people well-funded, get those projects really off the ground. So.
Okay, so this is a yes or no question. So since we all believe in open source, do you have a patent that is private? Do you? No, do you? You don't. So why do you have a patent that is private?
From previous companies.
So are you gonna open it up to people?
Well, I guess I no longer have the right to do that because the company owns it.
Okay.
Which I don't necessarily like, right?
So that means in the future all your projects are gonna be open source. Just like Elon Musk, you're gonna show us all your patents, and are you gonna do that?
It's tricky. I think you have to play both with the system and without the system. So I think if there are things that are really beneficial to humanity,
Yeah.
then of course I would say those things should be open. Those should be developed in an open way. But I also fundamentally believe if you do the dynamics right, then you don't even need to like worry about patenting in the first place, because for example, Linux, a lot of that as the genesis is not, there's no patents, there's no stuff, it's just people getting stuff done. And if you have the right team and you're doing that fast enough, then you can move on that, and then people will have to be forced to follow you. The trouble is if you have something and you don't have the resources, and you have no way to protect it, a big company can just squash that or do whatever with you. So unless blockchain or whatever has protections, like that's what we're trying to build, safety in numbers, these kind of mechanisms like with Cambria, it's a bit tricky. You might have to play a little bit with the system in order to see your idea to fruition and get it out to as many people as possible without it getting scooped, without it getting all these other things too. So that's how.
Okay, yeah, so the next question is specifically for Jinjing and for you. Okay, so one of the concerns of implementing open source or having so many people contribute while you're building your code is about when you're implementing the peer review. You want to have other people review the codes and everything. So how do you set the standards when you have so many people contributing to the codes And do you have an incentive mechanism to really make sure that the review is done properly?
That's a good question. Definitely, I mean, the code quality that goes into all this project is very important. And I do strongly believe there needs to be like good practice, like good procedures. Like for example, each project should set up their kind of own style guide and their own kind of infrastructure to ensure that like the code has like minimum test coverage and kind of fits like this type of certain style guide. And there are dedicated like peer reviewers that can have the ability to review like each aspect of the code. So I do strongly believe those things needs to be in place. As for the incentives, I think that's kind of a tricky question. I mean, the most ideal thing would be like those procedures is just handled like automatically, right? Like if you have really good like infrastructure, like you have awesome linters, like kind of automatic like integration system that kind of threw out any kind of bad code, that would be the most ideal case. But while you can try to aim for that goal, there still needs to be like manual reviews. I think maybe that's how like blockchain can come into play, right? Like kind of you, there are like, you give some like token incentives to key players of this open source project, and then those key players will kind of safeguard like the code, the gateway of the code into the project, and they will have the incentives to kind of ensure the quality because they were holding the tokens. So I think that could be like an improvement on the current open source management.
Yeah. So I guess actually I have a whole different range of perspectives. So what I feel actually is open source projects are really like a long tail. So the vast majority of projects, it's not like you have a long line of contributors lined up to give you code. It's like, okay, one person, oh, yay, this person actually contributed something back, you know, yay, you know, that kind of thing. So actually, I think for a lot of projects, you know, that are not large yet, it's actually pretty simple. It's more like you work with the person. They'll be like, hey, I suggest this is an improvement. So you just talk to them, like, you know, email, whatever. It's not like this big committee, you know. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of them are like that, right? Yeah. So, yeah. But I think, so, you know, so the important thing is as you go to scale, it's about the way the team runs. So, you know, you can look at an open source project that's and try to vet how well they've been successful at doing that. But beyond that, I think it's actually not as big a problem as some people think, because it really is like most scales. It's not massive scale. So.
Any question from the audience? No question? Okay.
Going into the protocol level of things, which I understand to some extent, but I feel like where a lot of the value is going to be captured is going to be on the application layer. No different than like all the social media sites, you know, building on top of these things. And I guess to that point as well, it seems like there's a lot of businesses out there trying to replace existing services that are pretty good and just making it decentralized as though that's going to work. And it seems like the whole point of a new technology is it enables you to do things you couldn't do before. So I guess, like, how do you monetize these token models? And yeah, what do you see as like applications that are like will kind of push the frontier of, you know, people's functionality or productivity like in their everyday lives?
I think that's a targeted question at me, I think. First of all, you're absolutely right, and you're going to see it next couple months with a lot of crypto companies, I feel, just from personal communication with them. But if you think about it, a lot of these projects, there's still a notion of a decentralized autonomous organization, right? Whereas this notion that you build a project surrounded by communities, there's tokens for that particular community, as more people come on this community and help out, the tokens are their incentives, right? So with BToken, we're basically an Airbnb on blockchain. 0% commission is what we advertise, right? Interesting thing is, we recently changed that model to actually take some commission. So from the guest side, we used to take 0%. Now we're taking 8%, which is better than Airbnb's. Airbnb takes anywhere 15 to 20 on the guest, right? On the host side, we take 3%, 2%, whereas Airbnb takes 3% from the host side, right? Funny thing is, you guys know what happened? after we added in revenue, or after we added in commission, people started using more our platform more. So if you're a crypto project out there and you're having issues, add in some commissions. Maybe you'll do better.
Yeah, yeah.
I would call it that.
Yes,
maybe,
yes.
I won't call it that.
To some extent, you might have to be
I
a
won't call it
middleman.
that, but
yeah.
you know, near the middle, I suppose.
Yeah.
We got to feed our engineers. You know?
Yeah. I actually think that all crypto projects should literally have a business model.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, what happened last year where people are just coming up with so many ideas saying, hey, the coin is going to go up, left so many people frustrated. And especially the investors, right? And if a project doesn't have a business model, it's really going to fail. And when we talk about the adoption, building more applications, we're going to remove the D, so just the applications. And you know, one of the projects that we built called Kick City, it's influencer marketing, micro-influencer marketing for events on blockchain. And we tried to reward people with tokens. When we launched it in Houston, people didn't know what tokens were, and they didn't want to earn tokens. We said, okay, well, let's use the tokens for internal settlement. You're going to earn dollars. Just share events with your friends. And it went like this, viral. And so even in July this year, I'll be inviting you to a conference we're hosting in LA Convention Center. It's going to be called Influencer Marketing Conference. I'm bringing all influencers to really be using products on blockchain. And the good thing here is that they don't even know it's blockchain. And that is the only way we can really get into mass adoption. It's only those that know it's blockchain, because when I write emails, I don't even know the codes behind it. All I know, I'm writing emails. And until we get to the stage where we're having such things, that's when we're going to have the mass adoption. But without the infrastructure, we cannot do that. So that's why we need, you know, both sides. Yeah, okay, so we're moving a little bit into AI. When we look at AI, we have like companies. If you look at Google has, you know, the maps and everything. Facebook has social media. When we look at the AI space, do we think there's a company that will own the AI space? Is there a company like that? Okay, X wants to say something. Yeah.
I think that the company that will dominate will be the company that builds the tool set that the most people can build on top of in a most accessible way, meaning that you don't have to train up a whole AI staff to build the models and train them yourself, but whatever company comes out with the developer tool sets that makes it so you can build AI applications or applications that use AI that don't have any, that have less barriers for companies to integrate AI into their technologies. I don't think that there's a market leader yet. I think everyone's competing. I'm pulling out for my company because I got stock in it. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
So I think for me, it's a little bit more of like, I think I take a little bit more of the, like the OpenAI view to things, where actually AI is kind of like a runaway thing. So the better you get at it, the better you can sort of do it, right? You can have self-improving models, you can have self-improving nets, you can do all these interesting things where AI starts to design itself. So to me, it is kind of a race where I think whoever kind of can get to that point first can have quickly a very large lead. And so that's why it's a little bit scary. I think for me personally, I'm very interested in the ideas of like sort of governance of technology and like high tech, how that gets rolled out into society and the impacts. And I think that's something, you know, personally I try to read a lot of books about, I study. And I think more people should be concerned because AI will happen fast, right? It takes a long time for some small things to happen, but it's like the second half of the chessboard effect, where once it's going, it goes really fast. So I think even U.S. and China, everyone is funding this, even at the country level. People are trying to make sure they're not left behind in AI. So I think it's going to be a fight to the end, wherever. So.
The music prediction, maybe, I don't know, maybe Pandora or Spotify or something like that will probably have the best team for that. Maybe that's like the way I'd see it.
Okay, so our last question for tonight will be, so my roommate works at Google and he's working at the research department of AI. So we were like having a debate on some stuff. And then we talked about this Julia Pearl. She came out last year talking about that, you know, the current art of designing AI is really flawed. because we believe people are working more on like using probability than looking at casual relationships. And so what do you think about that? Do you think people should go ahead working with the method we're using right now, using probability and statistics, instead of using casual relationships? What do you think about that?
That's a, oh, you want to go first? Go ahead. Oh, wait, okay. Well, I think that's a very good question. I think there can be many theories about it. I think in the end, one thing that people sort of have proven or found is that actually the human brain is pretty simplistic physically, right? So if you can really get to the information density, that level of synaptic connection, that level of integration, which is still orders of magnitude above what we have, but we are going quickly, then you can do a lot of what humans can do. And arguably, that's not necessarily the best form of intelligence, that's the best form of anything, but there are representations in that space for everything that we see and that we do. So you can sort of, that's the sort of like the physical interpretation of AI, right? If you can duplicate to some extent all the neurons in the human brain, don't you have equivalent thinking capacity? And as computing power increases, what's one brain today becomes 2 tomorrow, becomes 4, becomes so on and so forth, then within a year, whatever, however many fast that grows, you have something that's equivalent to the entire race in like, one form factor, right? So I think that's sort of like the argument I would say is that I think a lot of the recent stuff with deep learning is modeling after human synaptic connections and stuff like that. And whether that's right or wrong, I don't really know, but I think there's enough leg room there to go quickly that you can find some very interesting, very powerful AI just out of that alone,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it also really depends on how would you like define intelligence, because we tend to think, hey, like things need to act like the way we act is for them to be called intelligent. So like, I mean, if in that case, I think either approach is just kind of on the surface. I mean, you're trying to like imitate how people act, whether it's from the probabilistic or just do like observe humans' behavior, like this happens, so that happens. I think if being like human or like human but smarter than human is the final goal, then maybe the breakthrough really come after like there's more understanding of how human brain like actually works. So maybe it's like a really interdisciplinary kind of research effort. Like there might need to be some medical breakthrough, like psychological like studies or something like that.
Okay, awesome.
My quick answer is I don't care as long as you get the results.
That's good, yeah. So any question from the audience? Okay.
I can talk about that. Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking to and a lot of legal fees talking about licensing. I think licensing is really tricky because I think a lot of it is old and is not really easily adaptable to this new open source economy. I think what we're trying to do with Cambria is we're trying to craft licenses that are relatively sane in terms of similar to things that are out there, but then we learn from lawyers that it's actually a little bit tricky to craft those in a way that will, be fully like enforceable. When you go, say some case goes to court, it's very hard to craft those things. So a lot of the mechanisms we try to craft is you have that license and it's good faith, right? People are going to try to behave according to that. It's sort of like the book of sort of law, right? But then you really need ulterior mechanisms. For example, like the strength of a community to find and penalize free riders collectively. Like, hey, we all think this robot company took our tech and is trying to make military weapons out of it. That's against the sort of license agreement for this. Although we may not win in court, we have enough value and enough people saying this is wrong that we can sort of make an example of them or ostracize them or whatever. I think you need to kind of have both. That's our approach to it. So.
When I moved up here, say 10 years ago, when I first started working at a small startup, my boss told me, whenever you open source something, since we use open source, we want to contribute back to the community, let them use however they want. Why don't we just use Apache 2? So I've been using that model since. Please.
So this is not legal advice, and it's just my opinion. And so I work on open source licenses for a number of companies, including PayPal, and there's always an issue about tainting or mixing proprietary code with open source code. And with open source, there's just a number of licenses that you can use. Some of them you have to basically have it in the license agreement and have the attribution there. So I think, it really depends on, the model and how you want to share information, and what kind of how is the end user getting the license, and is it a component or is it an end product? So there's just a lot of considerations about how that should be structured.
So I worked at early open source companies like Sugar and Jaspersoft, and so the interesting thing is there was the freemium model where you have a community model, and then what you have is you have additional value. So for example, Jaspersoft still has a freemium or a free model, but if you want to embed the reporting tool into your software, you have to buy the pro or the professional model. And so, but I will say, the one interest, being on the sales side, and I build out channels for them, we wanted to put some code to prompt people in the open source model, the community model, to say, hey, you have these features. And the true believers of open source were like, no way. So there is definitely, we needed to sell things in order to keep the lights on, and so it was a fine balance as far as what features and functionality was going to be included in pure open source versus the pro model. Yeah, absolutely. So Jaspersoft still does that today, and so does Sugar. And so I think the interesting, just a side note, is Sugar actually has had somebody fork their community model and added functionality on it. And so it just is the reality of what can happen. And it was always a thorn in the side, but like the community revolted and, they got shamed, but still there's a fork of Sugar out there based upon the community model that someone took and went to go sell. And so I think that's in a true open source model. Now, what the protocols have done in blockchain is I call it a SaaS open source model. So sure, the code is open source, but people are charging you a fee to run on their open source code. And so I think that is another model that I don't think is proved out yet, given the fact that there's not many dApps running on the protocols to pay for gas. I mean, I think Ethereum, yes, ES is coming along, but that's the other open source model. We've called it a SaaS open source, where code is free, but if anybody wants to use a code, they have to pay.
Okay, thank you very much, our panelists. It's been awesome and very enlightening. And thank you everyone who's been here. Please, a round of applause for yourselves.
So before we go, we have a winner of our Cambria Nano Ledger for sharing our events. So the winner is Thomas. If you are Thomas, can you please come up? And then, well, Miss Travu come up from Cambria to present the events. Oh, yes, Thomas. Well, can we have a photographer who can take a picture of us as well? Yeah. So this is Cambria's first meetup in the Bay Area. So we really appreciate you guys coming, and I just wanted to thank Thomas for sharing. It's a Cambria custom, and they made it for us. So you guys, please talk to all the speakers, hang out, have fun. We have a lot of food. Please take some food home. Thank you.
Hey, I'm gonna.
headphones on right now.
Okay,
Look
okay.
right into that camera.
Okay, okay. Hi, I'm a neuroscientist. I've been working in AI since 2008, and if you like the panel discussion on the intersection of neuroscience and AI, I'm actually teaching a class we just announced today at Node in May. You should go to their website, nodeworldwide.com, and sign up for my class, and then we'll teach you all about AI from the perspective of biology and how to use neuroscience directly to inform innovative new AI and turn it into your projects and all that. Thank you.